P.W. Litchfield Heritage Center presents the Heritage Lecture Series, Phoenix Beneath the Surface, presented by Steve Schumacher, the Phoenix Mayor's Office official historian.
So my focus today is really the very earliest years of Phoenix and the community of Phoenix from about 1867 to 1871. That doesn't mean I don't know about World War II and statehood and Arizona being a territory. I sure do. But I like talking about the very earliest days because those years of Phoenix, the very beginnings and the earliest pioneers, in my opinion, do not get enough attention. I mean, they're getting more attention now that I'm on board, but for years, they didn't. So that's a role that I'm trying to fulfill. So how did Phoenix begin? The Huhugam were a group of indigenous people. They were around for over 1,000 years until about 1450 AD. So from about 400 AD to about 1450 AD, there was a group of indigenous Native American people that inhabited the valley. Upwards of about 50,000 Huhugam people. Now you may say, Steve, you're pronouncing that wrong. It's Hohokam. Well, when you dig into it, both words are correct. Hohokam and Huhugam. Hohokam is more of an archaeology type term. Huhugam talks more about the community. They still have the same definition for the most part, but the indigenous folks today, the Native Americans today, prefer the term Huhugam. That's why I use that. So they covered the entire valley. If you want to experience some of the very original Huhugam community, it still exists at a museum that today is called Sudafvaki Museum. Since it was the inception of it, it was called Pueblo Grande. And about 3 years ago, the official name was changed to Sudafvaki. Just rolls off the tongue. But there are several original indigenous canals still there. It's on the south side of the museum, right at about 44th Street in Washington. So if you're like me, and you like to stand in a place where a lot of history happened, you like to feel that energy from 1,000 years ago, that's the place to go. I mean, it's a little warm this time of year, but they do give tours once it cools off. So that Phoenix really began with the Huhugam community that covered pretty much the whole valley, upwards of 50,000 people. The largest community was right there at Sudafvaki as well. Now what happened is in about 1450, and the archaeologists and the experts, nobody has come to an agreement as to what happened to the Huhugam. They really don't know if there was some sort of war with other communities. Was there a drought? Did they meld into a different community? The experts cannot agree. So from about 1450 to about 1867, the valley was pretty much empty. There was no community here. People would pass through on their way either up to Prescott or somewhere else, but the valley was pretty much empty. And then in 1867, there was a guy, a miner from Wickenburg. You may have heard his name. His name was Jack Swilling. Anybody ever hear that name? He was a miner, a very successful miner up in Wickenburg. He had come through what became Phoenix, and he noticed those ancient canals. And he was an entrepreneur and a visionary and a capitalist, so he said, you know what? If I can duplicate what the Huhugam did and dig some canals, divert water from the Salt River, plant some seeds for crops, we can grow these crops, we can sell them to the miners in Wickenburg and to the cavalry up at Fort McDowell. So the original pioneers were all about making money. I mean, why else would you come here without air conditioning? So that was Jack Swilling's story. So in 1867, he went back up to Wickenburg, gathered about 15 people with him, rode back down here and started digging a ditch. So this little drawing is like, you know, they're harvesting some wild hay along the Salt River, and he noticed the old indigenous canals and thought, well, we can do that same thing and make some money. So the very beginnings of Phoenix from an Anglo standpoint, about 1867. Again, remember, for 1,000 years, this valley was filled with indigenous folks, and then for some reason they just disappeared. So from an Anglo standpoint, Jack Swilling was the founder of Phoenix. He noticed the indigenous made canals, rounded up, you already said. Managed to pull together about $10,000 in the equipment to dig the ditches. Started digging a ditch to divert water from the Salt River. The first attempt was unsuccessful, so they went further down the river. Now, I love telling people, and if you've been in the Goodyear, Litchfield, far west part of the valley your whole life, you're not going to necessarily know a lot about Tempe. But had those pioneers, Jack Swilling and the 15 people with him, had they been successful in their first attempt, what we know as Phoenix today would be in Tempe. That's where they tried to divert water from the Salt River the first time. They ran into some limestone that they didn't have the equipment. They didn't have the explosives to blow it up, and it was too hard. So after trying for a while, they gave up and moved further down the river near the airport, that's where they were successful. So had they been successful, the city of Phoenix would be where Tempe is today. This is, and I know it looks like an ant farm, and I admit to that. But the main thing I want you, this is a map of the original communities that were being put together in the earliest days of Phoenix. And what I want you to pay most attention to are the numbers. Number 1 to the right, then 2 is in the upper middle, and then 3 just to the left, and number 4. Now, number 1 represents the very first attempt, which was right across. If you know where the Mill Avenue Bridge is, the very first attempt that they tried to dig a ditch was just on the north end of the Mill Avenue Bridge. So that's what that number 1 is. What I'm trying to depict here is to show you that what we know as Phoenix today was really the 4th choice. That was not the first choice of building a community that ended up being called Phoenix. It was the 4th. Now, if you look a little bit more up and to the left, you'll see the number 2. That's at about 36th Street and Fillmore, not far off of Van Buren. If any of you one of the landmarks is the Celebrity Theater. If you've ever been there, the second attempt to build a community was maybe 500 yards to the west of Celebrity Theater. So that was the second attempt. That's where Jack Swilling and some of the other earliest pioneers started putting their homes together and putting adobe structures together. But that really didn't fly with the number of the rest of the people who were starting to populate the area. Part of it was Swilling and a couple other guys pretty much bought up all that property, so nobody else was going to get an opportunity. So when it came to voting and where they're going to place Phoenix, that got voted down. The number 3, that was the 3rd attempt to build a community. If you know where St. Luke's Hospital is, it's about 19th Street in Van Buren. That's where that number 3 is. That was the 3rd attempt. Unfortunately, you got to remember that the earliest pioneers were basically farmers. They were growing crops to sell, and that's what they were trying to do. Now, that area around St. Luke's Hospital, number 3, was covered with remnants of the Huhugang communities. Remember I said there, it was all over the valley. And these farmers did not want to take the time to move all that and clean it all up so they could grow crops. So that didn't work either. And so what happened is there was a vote. It was decided that the original town site for Phoenix was going to be where that number 4 is. And that's what we know as Phoenix today, which is essentially the center is Central Avenue in Washington. That's the center of the original town site. 320 acres, bounded by Van Buren on the north, 7th Avenue on the west, 7th Street on the east, and Harrison on the south, which is essentially the train tracks today. So that's what you see in the crosshatch up there. That's the original town site of Phoenix.
You said that people are voting, so
Right.
what made it that you could vote for where you put it? How did that?
That's a great question. You know, I really don't know. I think it was probably just somebody, if you were in the area, you know, there was the earliest days, the earliest population identified was only 240 people. So that's a great question. How did you qualify for voting? I don't know. Did you have to be 18 or show your phone bill? I don't know. Yeah, that's a great question. I really don't know exactly. The history, the stories are mostly around the 240 people voting, and a large majority of them were Hispanic folks. What's interesting about, another piece that's interesting is when they got to voting for the county seat, there was actually more people that voted, according to the records, than the population. So there was a little bit of tampering going on there somewhere. Now this is just a picture of, I mentioned earlier, the Mill Avenue Bridge, and that's Hayden Butte, A Mountain, Tempe Mountain, whatever you want to call it. If any of you remember that area, did you ever go to Montes La Casa Vieja? Yeah, most of us have, who lived here for a long time. That's right, just to the right of that hill is where Montes was. And so I put this in here because this, where these cars are, that's about where Swilling and his crew tried the first. There was a flour mill. Flour was incredibly important in the early communities because you could bake bread and do all kinds of things around food and nourishment if you had a flour mill. So when communities started, flour mills were one of the first structures, first businesses that were put together. So what this picture shows is the flour mill that was at about 36th Street in Fillmore, trying to get that second choice to become a community. So this was called the Hellings Mill. A guy named William Hellings put the flour mills together. He and Jack Swilling were the main two people who were really pushing that area around celebrity theater to become Phoenix. So these are the ruins. The ruins were still standing for quite a while. Just some more newspaper pictures. That actually they built a golf course around. It was called the Hollywood Golf Course. And, it was actually called the El Molino, which translates to the mill. It was called the El Molino Golf Course for a number of years as well. This is another picture of it with a couple ladies sitting on the ruin, just to give you a little bit of perspective on how big that was.
Sir?
This is one of those things, we all like to go back to the old days, I think, at some point in time. I would have loved to have been able to walk around those ruins, if I could go back in time. Now, what I like to show is this map really makes the point that a flour mill was incredibly important, and people would spend a lot of money, a lot of time, put a lot of energy and effort into putting a flour mill together. Now, William Hellings, the guy that built that flour mill that I mentioned, it was the working parts of the flour mill were actually used. They weren't brand new. but he, up at the top of that red line, he bought the parts for the flour mill in San Francisco. And he paid $75,000 for all of the components of a flour mill that were used. And it wasn't even brand new. So he bought them in San Francisco, put them on a boat, came all the way down, stopped off in Cabo and had a margarita, turned around, went back up the Gulf, offloaded at the Colorado River, got on a barge, went up to Ehrenberg, put on freight, brought into Phoenix. The guy really wanted to build a flour mill. So can you imagine? I mean, 75,000, that's a lot of money now. I don't even know what that relates to in 18. We're talking about 1870 when he did that. Yes, sir.
Where did he get his money?
Well, he had a big operation, a flour mill, a hog business in Tucson. He and his brother, they had another business up in Prescott. So they were pretty successful already. He's actually the guy that funded the original building of the Black Canyon Road, you know, up through Rock Springs and all that. He financed that. So he was a pretty wealthy guy, but it was because of his other businesses before he came to the valley.
It would be 1.8 million.
Is that right? For a flour mill?
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Well, that's definitely a chunk of money. Now, I mentioned earlier the El Molino Golf Course in 1930. This is an aerial shot. I've circled in red the golf course, or the ruins of the mill were still there. And any of your golfers, I don't know if you hit it in the ruins, is that a penalty or free drop? I don't know. But, so the ruins were still there well into 1930. You can see the canals running right by it. Have a flour mill, you got to have a water source, right? So the canal, that's the that canal that you see running right through the flour mill property. That was the original canal. It's called the Swilling Ditch. Salt River Valley Canal is called at one point. And then there's up into the right corner. There's another canal there. That was the second one that was dug. It was called the Maricopa Canal. Actually, with the if canals and the history of all this, if that does anything for you, this Maricopa Canal in the upper right-hand corner, there is still an available, visible remnant of that canal in the west parking lot of the old Greyhound Park. It's a swap meet now, and the Phoenix Rising soccer team have built a stadium right there. And believe me, every time I drive by there, you guys better not be messing with that. But it's right there. It's still there. The soccer team has assured me that if they decide to do something with the rest of that parking lot, I will be the first one to know. So hopefully, you know. The other thing is, it's hard to see. You see little red numbers on all those. History nerds like me, when we have some free time, we figure out what were the different holes on the old golf course. So I figured it out. We're 1, 2, 3, and yeah. Oh, by the way, that big mass of building and grass and trees in the lower left, that's the Arizona State Hospital, the insane asylum, which has been around since the late 1880s. So just to give you a perspective on where that was located. This is another picture of the same thing, but it's overlaid with a modern day shot. You can see Celebrity Theater, that circle just up and to the right of the red circle. So that's where that $75,000 flour mill was. Phoenix settlement, there was actually a marker that was installed, I believe, by the Daughters of the American Revolution at 28th Street in Van Buren. And the words talked about the earliest pioneers and the farming and what they grew. The very first crop was barley. That's what they grew. And This was at 28th Street in Van Buren. Unfortunately, about 20 years ago now, late at night, a car came around the corner, went off, and demolished it. Obviously, it was late at night. City crew came out, picked it all up, whatever was left, was never heard from again. Believe me, I've looked in every corner and talked to every police officer and streets department and everything, and nobody knows what happened to the remnants of that marker. So, yeah. Jack Swilling, as I mentioned, he was an entrepreneur, he was a visionary, he was a capitalist. His vision was that the property he bought, just on the north side of the airport really, would become not only the county seat, but the capital of Arizona and the main city of Phoenix. That's what his vision was. So he went about building a home for he and his wife, and I don't remember how many kids they had at that time, but they ended up having 7 kids. So however many kids he had with him. Now this home, that's a picture of the ruins. Now if you can understand, Phoenix at that time, it was too expensive to bring wood from, Flagstaff or Prescott or anything. So the whole Phoenix area structures were adobe. Basically mud, water, straw. That's what the buildings were. And Swilling's home, in anticipation of Phoenix, of this area becoming Phoenix and the county seat, he built a home that was almost 5,000 square feet, and it took 96,000 adobe bricks to build this structure. 96,000. But again, remember, in anticipation of once that area became Phoenix, he could either rent it or lease it or sell it to the city and make more money. So he put together that adobe home. That's the only photograph of Jack Swilling that we know of. Yes, ma'am.
Where was the home, where did he build the home at?
It was at about 36th Street and the railroad tracks.
Did he also build a home up in the New River area?
Sure did, yes. Yes, Black Canyon City, but up that way. Well, what ended up happening is those votes all started going against him. And so he got mad and said, well, heck with all you guys. And he sold that property, moved up to Black Canyon City, took his family, built a rock home, which still stands. Up there in the yard, it's private property. There's a regular house there, and then there's this little rock house. Yeah, so he did. Yeah, so 96,000 adobe. That other person in that photo with him is Jack and his wife Trinidad adopted 2 Apache children, and this is one of them. They had adopted an Apache boy. This is Gavilan. That's his name, and then a daughter, and her name escapes me at the moment. Dos Casas, this is a description in 1872, and I'll read this fairly quickly. I think it's important because if any of you know where the old Greyhound Park is, or the industrial area north of the airport, there's a Honeywell plant right there. It's about 36th Street, and the train tracks, very industrial. This is what it looked like in 1872, written by a couple guys who walked through the area. So as I'm reading this, just think about what you may know about a real industrial area of Phoenix just north of the airport right now. We came upon a neat little artificial pond and a clump of willows and cottonwoods, which was covered with tame ducks, the property of J.W. Swilling, whose house, a comfortable large one, 59 by 80 feet, stood nearby. Mr. Swilling's ranch is conveniently situated near the head of the main ditch, on which he has a vineyard and an orchard containing apple, peach, plum, pear, cherry, fig, walnut, and orange trees out in the desert, right? all of which looked thrifty and promising, except the latter, which were injured by the frost. A patch of fine, large cane close by gave indications of the future production of sugar. So that's what was going on in that area in 1872. Artificial pond with ducks, fig trees, walnut trees, orange trees, peach trees, pear trees. It was just an Eden. They learned very quickly that this part of the Sonoran Desert, you put water on it, stuff will grow. Just like the flour mill ruins, the ruins of Swilling's house, which was called Dos Casas, by the way, the ruins were there for a long time as well. You can see the train tracks, that black line going left to right. Oh, I do have a picture. There's the ruins of Swilling's Dos Casas again, and I had mentioned the rock house. Yeah, and that's, I would tell you, you can go there. I just try to give the owners, it's real obvious where it is, just let them know you just like to walk around, because they get a lot of requests to do something with that historic home. Swilling's Castle, Adobe, 36th Street and the train tracks. What that picture shows is a couple of years ago, I was riding around with the Salt River Project archivist, and she knows Jack Swilling backwards, forwards, every detail. And we're driving around, she's showing me this and that. She said, you know, Steve, there's still a couple Adobe bricks from Swilling's house over there. And I perk up a U-turn, you know, and here really quick. I said, where? She said, oh, it's over there. So we drive and we parked and we're looking through this. It's kind of a raggedy area, but there's a couple piles of rocks and trash. And she goes, oh, look, there's a couple there. And so she told me the whole backstory, which made a lot of sense. So I was motivated a couple months later to go back there and try to identify somebody that I could ask, say, can I have those? You know, they're laying there in the pile. And so I located a couple ladies and a mean dog on the leash. And so I was talking to them, and 2 hours later I said, yeah, you can have it. So I now have it. So what I'm trying to do is move from they may be from Swilling's house, because other than that story she told, which made sense, we really don't have any documentation. So I'm trying to move from these may be from Jack Swilling's house to they are from Jack Swilling's house. And that's proven to be quite a chore to date Adobe. I had an ASU professor say, yeah, I can probably do it, Steve, but it'll destroy it. Well, I'm kind of okay with maybe from Jack Swilling's house. So that's kind of neat. St. Luke's, this is where the third opportunity was for community. This another ant farm, I understand. The main thing I'd like you to take away from this is the underlying image is this area around St. Luke's today. The pink structures are all, remember I mentioned that the Huhugam ruins were all over that area and the farmers didn't want to dig them up and do all that. Well, that's what they were talking about. All those pink structures were ruins from the Huhugam community in that area. So you can see what a chore that would have been for them to plant some crops. Now, if you look down towards the bottom right-hand corner, you see a couple yellow structures. That was a saloon and a general store that was on that property. You know, a couple Anglo guys put that together. The town site decision, you know, they had to come to a point, right? They had all these different choices. The Tempe one didn't work. The one around 36th Street in Fillmore, yeah, they didn't feel good about that. And then the Huhugam ruins are number 3. And so they had another town meeting, and they picked 3 people to make the decision. Where should we put this town site? We're going to grow, that's obvious. You know, we need to have a town site. We need to sell lots, do all those things. And so they held two meetings, one on October 20th and the other on the 26th. On the 20th, they picked those three guys. They said, okay, come back in a week. We'll get together again. Tell us what your decision is. So on the 26th, they came back and said, okay, what we think is best is the area bounded by Van Buren, train tracks, 7th Avenue, 7th Street. So that's what became Phoenix today. Now I love showing this because, again, as a pure historian, nerdy kind of historian, I go, gosh, I wonder where that meeting was held. Well, there it was on that yellow map. It was at a store that was owned by a guy named Murphy. That's where they met. And that spot today, have any of you ever taken your kids or grandkids to the Children's Museum of Phoenix?
Yeah.
Oh.
Right where that meeting was held, right at the entrance to the Children's Museum of Phoenix, which is right near 7th Street in Van Buren. So for a history nerd, that's kind of cool to figure that out. Yes, sir.
Do you know who the three fellows were that made the decision?
Yeah, I can't remember two of them, but one of them, and I was going to get to in a minute, one of the three was a guy named Darrell Dupa. You may have heard that name. Darrell Dupa is credited with giving Phoenix its name. But the other two, it just escapes me at the moment. To commemorate October 26th, 1870, this is another one, Lisa, that I helped kind of nudge the mayor and the city council. I said, you know, we've got 150th anniversary coming up. This is 5 years ago. And so they put the money together to make commemorative coin. And unfortunately, we had a lot of big plans to celebrate that anniversary, but of course, like many things, COVID hit, and we weren't able to do everything that we wanted. But one of the things that we were able to do to commemorate that date when the decision was made to put Phoenix where it is today was October 26, 1870. And that's pretty neat that the city did that. The original town site, that's just a small plat map. Survey was completed in 1870. There was 98 blocks, 320 acres. First lots were sold in 1871, and the first lot sold for the total of $103. And that was pretty expensive because some of the more outlying lots from the center of Phoenix, they went for as low as 20 bucks. I don't know what the inflation calculator does for that, but I have a feeling it's probably still pretty reasonable today. If any of you are familiar with downtown Phoenix, the very first lot that was sold was on the southwest corner of 1st Street, Washington. Again, that's my history nerd guy coming through, knowing that.
About 2,400.
2,400 for a downtown lot in Phoenix. One of the things a lot of people don't know is that the original names of the streets in that town site, with 2 exceptions, were named after Indian tribes in the valley. You can see Apache was 7th Street, Tonto 6th Street, Yavapai 7th Avenue, etc. So with 2 exceptions, down at the bottom, Montezuma is not an Indian tribe. That was 1st Street, and Cortez, 1st Avenue. So, and a lot of people, they'll just say the Phoenix streets were originally Indian tribes, and that's true to a point. But 2 of them, Cortez and Montezuma, were not Indian tribes. This is, we're talking about the lithograph. This was done about 4 years ago, trying to depict that lithograph that's on those postcards I gave you, more from a modern standpoint. But I prefer the old.
Yeah.
Yeah, the one you have in your hand. Just a quick thumbnail about this lithograph. It was done in 1885 by a guy named C.J. Dyer, who was an interim mayor of Phoenix for a while. He was a surveyor, he was a map maker. That was what his profession was. He put this lithograph together again in 1885, and this is what's called a bird's eye view. Looking to the northeast, you can see what is Paestoa / Squaw Peak in the distance. And this is what the town site of Phoenix looked like in 1885. Each of the, up in the top two corners, that's what I like to call 1885 street view, where you can look up real close at what you see the Arizona Falls and some of the buildings that were in place at that time. Now, my understanding, and I have a good friend who is really a lithograph expert, C.J. Dyer expert, in the world of lithographs, historically, people that really collect these and look at them and know about them, this bird's eye view of Phoenix from 1885 is one of the top 3 or 4 that has ever been done. As a matter of fact, if you Google C.J. Dyer bird's eye view of Phoenix, what'll come up is an original of these, one of these, for sale for $56,000.
Wow.
Yeah, wow. So every time I think about that. But there was only, again, for decades, for a long time, Phoenix was relying on marketing to investors back east in Chicago, in different places. So that's what this was. It was a marketing tool for people to send to their relatives to other parts of the country in hopes that they would come and invest in Phoenix. There was a total of maybe 300 of them made and printed. We only know of about 8 or 10 of them that still remain. So this is a really, really important document. That's kind of why I gave that to you. So one of the questions, if not the main question, that got me interested in Phoenix history was one of those 118-degree days that we all have experienced. And we go, oh my God, what am I doing here? And how do people sleep without air conditioning and all these things? Well, remember that 122? It was just the anniversary of that not long ago. But I decided I wanted to find out how do people handle the heat, especially without air conditioning. So daytimes are just as hot, nights not so much. It's just, we've all heard this heat island. The buildings absorb the heat and push it out in the evenings. Adobe, some of them 12, 18-inch thick Adobe bricks. And there was an ice factory that went into business in 1878. We can talk about instant billionaire, right? Go to Phoenix and build an ice factory. And that's what happened. The guy, Samuel Lowndes, became boom right away. He owned almost all the property in downtown Phoenix, made so much money. Here's some pictures of how people manage, because personally for me, if it's too warm in my bedroom, I have difficulty sleeping. So how do they sleep at night with all that? Well, you can see in the upper left-hand corner, some people actually moved their beds outside. Slept out there, wet down sheets, wrap yourself in sheets, and pray for a breeze. The guy in the upper right-hand corner got a little more fancy, put some stilts together and screened in his sleeping area. The bottom is even the hotels. They built the hotels with what were called sleeping porches. There's still a number of houses around that have those. But this is a picture of the sleeping porch on a hotel called the Ford Hotel. And you can see they moved the beds outside during the summer months so guests could stay a little bit cooler. So there was ways to do it, but the reality is the evenings were not as hot. Just some of the early pioneers, just so you can put some names together of the people that really formed Phoenix in the very beginning. John Y.T. Smith, he was the first Anglo in Phoenix. He was hired by the U.S. Army, the cavalry of Fort McDowell, to come down to the valley, and there was wild hay, wild grass growing along the Salt River. And so he came down to the area and harvested all that, took it by wagon back up to Fort McDowell to feed the horses and cattle. So he was really the first Anglo in Phoenix. Fun story about him. When he first came to the valley, his name was just John Smith. And of course people say, oh yeah, you know, that whole, yeah, right, what is your real name? And so he literally had to petition the territorial legislature to get his name changed. And so he added that YT in the center, and guess what that stood for?
Yes, true.
Close. Yours truly. So I don't know if that made him more believable or what, but it just kind of a funny story. So his name officially and legally was John Yours Truly Smith. Jack Swilling built the first canal in the valley, 96,000 adobe brick house. Gerald Dupa, credited with naming Phoenix and Tempe and a town called Kyrene, which is between Tempe and Chandler. He was on the Phoenix Town Site Selection Committee, which the other two can't call. British lord, born in France to British parents, who's an ambassador from England to France. Very, very interesting guy. John Alsop, first mayor of Phoenix. He also led the creation of Maricopa County. Now this guy was a miner, he was a probate judge, he was the first mayor of Phoenix, he was an attorney, and he was also a physician. I don't know what else he could do with his free time. Pretty much anything you needed, he could probably help you out with. He also built the first windmill in Phoenix. William Hancock, that plat map I showed a little bit earlier of the 98 lots and 320 acres, this is the guy that did the survey, William Hancock. He also built the very first building, an adobe structure, in the Phoenix town site. So he's credited, some people call him the father of Phoenix, you know, between Swilling, who kind of dug the first ditch, and William Hancock, because he completed the first survey and built the first building. Melinda's Alley, the reason I share this is primarily the upper left-hand photo, is to give you an idea that Phoenix was an adobe town. You know, we didn't have a brick factory for a long time. It was too expensive to bring the wood. Some people did, but you had to have money to do that. So essentially, Phoenix was an adobe town. The majority, if not all, of the structures were made of adobe, and that's what that upper left-hand photo shows. Now that area is what is called Melinda's Alley, and you can see the Renaissance Hotel on the right, the professional building, which was the home of the Valley Bank in the 60s and 70s, is to the left. But that alley with the mural painted on it is called Melinda's Alley. And it's called Melinda's Alley because Melinda Curtis was a lady of the evening. And her place of business was right there at Central Avenue and Melinda's Alley, right across the street from the Hurd Building, if you know that area at all. And that is a mural of her, which is just absolutely beautiful. And it shows the original Adams Hotel, which in 1910 burned to the ground. And so it's a wonderful mural, but it depicts that's where she did her business. She actually even lived in that larger building in the upper left-hand photo.
It's a speakeasy too there now.
There is, and it's called Melinda's Alley, yeah. Yeah, it's, what's interesting, you can't see it, and I don't know if they still do it, but they probably do, but for a long time, because the speakeasy is only open select hours, and there's a red light on the wall there that when it's open, that red light is on.
Yeah.
A neat little twist. I mentioned the 1921 city flag. You can see it's the COVID days with all of us wearing. But that's some of my historian colleagues. That's Mayor Gallego in the center. she took a very personal interest in making sure this flag is well taken care of. Yeah, that was a city contest to design that flag in 1921, and that is the winner. Of course, when I first showed these photos, I got hammered for Steve, you're not wearing gloves. You're wearing gloves, handling something like that. Blew it. One of the latest thing, well, the latest thing that I have this core group of historians, and we're always looking for stuff. And one of the things that we recently found was a Civil War cannon out of Papago Park. And you see the left-hand photo there is the original Phoenix City Hall at First Street in Washington. You can see the cannon was there in on the City Hall property. And then there's a picture of me and some of my colleagues. We discovered it at Papago Park. So right now we're still working with the National Guard, it's on National Guard property, to try to, you know, get through all the bureaucracy of saying, okay, now we can do a press conference and all that kind of thing. But it has 1864 etched right on it. So that Civil War cannon predates Phoenix, which is pretty neat. So that's a recent discovery. We also, a little over a year ago, we put together a 30-minute video about the history of Phoenix. And it was on location. We have 7 different presenters, covers the entire Phoenix history in 30 minutes. And it was nominated for an Emmy Award last fall. Unfortunately, we didn't get the award, but again, just to be nominated was pretty cool. So if you go to the city of Phoenix, actually, if you go to the mayor's, Mayor Kate Gallego's webpage, she has a link to me, and when you click on City Historian, that video will be right there if you want to see it. And I mean, I've watched it 20 times probably. And every time I watch it, wow, this really is good. So if you can carve out 30 minutes, and again, I'm not one of the presenters. I wrote a lot of the content, but we have different presenters, which is pretty neat, get other people involved. So thank you for helping me build the future of Phoenix history. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. We have a little more time for questions over here, sir.
We used to live in Wickenburg,
Okay.
so we got a lot of the history about Henry Wickenburg and Jack Swilling. And I always thought Jack Swilling was not in Wickenburg until Henry Wickenburg, I guess, opened up the Bolshevik. So I'm always thinking, what happens if Henry Wickenburg never discovered gold up
Yeah,
there? Jack Swilling would not be there.
good
He
point.
may not be
Yeah,
here. This may not be considered a Phoenix.
yeah, yeah, Henry Wickenburg,
Now,
right?
you go back to history and how it somewhat predicted the future, not knowing that it was predicting this type of future
Yeah,
for us there.
that's a really good point. Actually, I had mentioned that Swilling and his gang rounded up $10,000. The majority of it came from Henry Wickenburg
Right.
to fund the first ditch. Yeah, really good point. Yes, ma'am.
So I know you pitched your position to the city council, and your career obviously means a lot to you. Can you tell us about why it's important to keep these memories alive and how it's relevant to people outside of Phoenix?
Yeah, really good question. Well, to me, I think the entire valley as one entity, really. I mean, you know, we all share the same things in many ways. So I think it's important that all of us, whatever, Tolleson, Avondale, Goodyear, whatever, we all pay attention to our history. Tell me the first part of the question.
Yeah, why is it important to keep these memories
Oh,
alive?
yeah, you know, and there's a lot of people that just say, well, you're doomed to, you're doomed to repeat the history if you don't change it. Personally, for me, why I think it's important is I think about, do you want people to remember you in a positive light? 100 years from now, we will all be memories. Do you want those memories to be positive? Do you want people to gather and listen to some person talking about the history back when we were around? Of course you do. So let's do the same thing for our pioneers. You know, let's show them the same respect that we would like to have shown to us when we're no longer around. I mean, that's kind of my selfish reasoning around it. Yeah, I spent a lot of time, not enough yet, doing talks and spending time with school kids. And because again, they're the ones that are going to be running all of this in 20, 30 years. So yeah. Does that answer okay? Yes, sir.
Do you recall where the ice factory was located?
Yeah, it was about 4th Street in Washington, in the northeast corner. S.D. Lount, L-O-U-N-T. Yeah, Samuel D. Lount. He was the one that started it. Canadian.
I just wanted to make a comment based on your question. I'm here basically on behalf of the Arizona Questers. We are a group that is about preserving, restoring, and providing education about historic events. So if this is something that you're interested in, because this was a fascinating presentation, I really suggest that you look up online azquesters.org to find a chapter locally to join, because we are all about preserving, restoring, and educating for future generations.
Yeah, really good point. Yeah, it's like, history really is a series of stories, right? I mean, we tell stories. And it's one thing for me to stand up here and tell a story, but it means a whole different thing if we were all together standing outside the ruins of Jack Swilling's house, right? So being able to tell and transfer stories from generation to generation to generation is much more meaningful, much more meaty, much more rich if we still have the structures we're talking about. I mean, if I'm just talking about an old building, it's been demolished, it just kind of goes off into the air, as opposed to being able to stand and experience that structure. Yes, ma'am.
So interesting. My question is about Baseline Road, and there is, I'm not sure I'm using the right word, a meridian on a little hill in Avondale that I understand was used for surveying and setting up boundaries and roads.
Yeah, it's called Monument Hill. It overlooks, I don't know what it's called, Phoenix International Raceway, it used to be called. But yeah, it looks, I think they put a gate up so you can't cheat and go sit on there and watch the races. But yeah, it's called Monument Hill, and that was where the very first survey was done. And there's a marker up there, a big circle, and that point, there's one spot where every survey, every property in the state of Arizona, with some reservation exceptions, starts at that spot. Every location in Arizona originates, and yeah, Baseline is called Baseline because that's the baseline survey. Yeah.
So that would have been in 18...
it was 1865-ish. Yeah, the original marker was part of the Gadsden Purchase. That's how they figured out the southern border. But it was like 1865-ish, yeah.
So you're the first Phoenix historian. We have a state historian, Marshall Turnbull. And I just learned about this Litchfield Heritage Group. Where are you with getting 1,500 people and historians like New York?
Yeah, that's a great question. Lisa and I were talking about that because I've got interest on the part of Glendale and now this a little bit. And, I would love to see a group meeting representing all the communities in the valley and talk about what can we all do together to enhance what each one of us is doing. And yeah, it's that's still a wishful thought on my part. I mean, believe me, I am incredibly busy just keeping up with Phoenix history. I mean, I have an Instagram page and a Facebook page, and again, I'm not trying to be an influencer and sell product, products, but if you go, just plug in my name to Facebook or Instagram, I'm Phoenix Official Historian. I post 2 original historic photographs every day. And I've done that 1.5 years probably. So yeah, if you just want to eyeball some historic photos of the Phoenix area, that's kind of on the back burner, you know. It's one of these days I'll corner Mayor Gallego and we'll have that conversation. Just hasn't happened yet. Yes, ma'am.
If you have time, how did he settle on the name Phoenix?
Really good question. Yeah, I like to mention that during the presentation, but I like to think of these guys sitting around on some hoo-hoo-gum ruins there by St. Luke's Hospital and their guns and shooting, drinking whiskey and trying to figure out a name. But there were other names bandied about. One was Stonewall. Jack Swilling had been in the Confederate Army during the Civil War, and he would have liked to see, because, no, we're not doing that. Salina was considered, but if you know the translation, that means salt. And we don't want investors from Chicago saying, salt, I'm not putting money in there. So that one was, but the most fun one that wasn't used was Pumpkinville. Phoenix was almost called Pumpkinville. But Darrell Dupa, he was pretty into English, you know, history and mythology, and pretty well-read guy. And the Phoenix bird is an Egyptian, Greek mythology story of a bird that lives for X amount of years. When it dies, it goes up in flames, and the ashes are there, and then a new Phoenix bird arises from the ashes. So Dupa told these guys this story and said, what we're creating here is like the Phoenix bird rising from the ashes. Our Phoenix is rising from the hoo-hoo-gum ruins. And I personally think that's a beautiful reason to name it Phoenix, you know. To honor the indigenous folks that came. A singular event that made a difference in the growth of Phoenix, it's that dam, Roosevelt Dam. Because up until that point, the Salt River was completely out of control. It would flood, it would dry up, it would flood, it would dry up. And farmers needed something to predict, so when they built the dam, they could control the water. Yes?
Interesting story on how he named Phoenix. How did he name Tempe?
I think there's a, what do you call it? There's 2 hills. There's a valley of Tempe in Greece. And it's like the Vale of Tempe in Greece. I think it's a vale between 2 hills. And you know why, I don't know the significance of that as compared to the Phoenix bird, but that's what he chose. I guess maybe, you know, there is kind of 2 hills there where Sun Devil Stadium is. Maybe that's what he was thinking. Yeah, good question. I'll have to look that one up. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Anything else?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you. My contact information, again, is on the back of the postcard I gave you, so feel free to send me an email. I think my phone number is on there too. You can text me if you like. No, just my email. That's, yeah, so if you have any other questions, if you have some other groups you think this would be good for, just send me a note. I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you so much.